Hey folks, Travis here with Interaction Games. We're doing a re-record and re-upload of a video we did a little bit ago that was a deep dive into one of our archetype characters for the Beer and Pretzels kit. I got notification that um, the audio wasn't good, so we're doing it again. And hopefully, this time we'll have some better audio and you'll be able to get a better idea of what this character is all about. So, this character's name is Souleymane Abdoul Aziz. He is a Temmanvyr. So, he's kind of like a troll, as you might expect. You can see from this portrait right here that he's kind of a big dude. He's 3.5 meters tall, basically about 700 kilos. So, we're looking at, what is that? 12, 13 feet tall and about 1,500 pounds. Kind of a big dude. So he is also of the Naosh Soronay. Soronay in our game is one of the, we have this term Naosh, which is the closest we come to a class. It basically refers to if your character has the ability to utilize supernatural powers. It has a lot to do with how those powers actually function. And so Soronay, an easy way to think of them is that they are mutants. They are characters that the powers they possess are inherent to their nature. It's not something they learn, it's just something they are. And there's a number of things that go along with being Soronay that are kind of cool. But we'll go through the rest of this little top part here. So he's level 4. We're in the process of changing this term level from level to something else. We'll have another video about that shortly, just kind of given our design process. But the idea being is that level, unlike in most games, level is not a mark of like a rank of how good you are at your job. It's more about the idea of just how the force of being that you have. Like, so the idea of that there are people who go through life and they are just successful. And they are successful in times and situations where you wouldn't necessarily be able to point to something and say, that is why this person succeeded. It was more of that's just who they are. They're just somebody who wins. And so that's what level kind of represents is that force. And it's a quantification of that. There are a number of different ways in which level interacts with talents and traits and powers and things of that nature. And so this is a measure of that. And you purchase it separately from anything else. It's not like you gain a certain number of experience points and you reach a threshold and then your level goes up. It is a separate and independent function of your character that is purchased through points. And that's that confusion, not really confusion, the fact that it is so different from every other game that utilizes level as a trait or as a characteristic of a character has made us reconsider whether or not to use that name, and we think we've come up with something that's a little better. Level is fairly concrete and defined, and the way we use it is a little more woo-woo, and so it's not necessarily a good representation to use level. Interaction is the closest we come to something like charisma. This is looks definitely play a factor into it. It's force of personality, those kinds of things. 2 for a character is completely average. The average human is going to have something in the range of 1 to 3, perhaps. And then the only other thing with interaction that's kind of interesting is that there is a distinction between having an interaction rating of 0 versus having no interaction rating. If a creature or an individual or an object does not possess an interaction rating, or if it's, we use, I think the Greek letter, I think it's theta, to represent empty set, or means it's a null set, it doesn't exist. that means that that creature lacks sentience. And so that is a way in which you can define the difference between, say, animals and robots and sentient creatures and things of that nature. And then when we get down here, you have a place to record your experience that you collect over time throughout the game. In Altered World, experience is not a score that you just accumulate. It is it's essentially a currency. You can use it in game to modify dice rolls. You can use it to increase your character's ratings, things of that nature. And so there's always this tension between saving it to be able to increase your character's power level versus spending it in the moment to affect dice rolls and be successful in the moment. So we'd like that tension. That's a key element of our design process. Lifestyle here is Wildsider. Basically, that just means that this character doesn't necessarily have access to a permanent home. This is something where this character is likely just going to live in the woods or whatever on their own, and that's the way that works. So the next we get to attributes. We've got a total of 8 primary attributes, 4 body, 4 mind, and then 5 derived or secondary attributes. That each of these secondary attributes are the average of some combination of these, and frankly, they always escape me exactly which ones they are. The only one that I know for sure that really truly matters is I say really truly matters, but reaction is the only attribute in the game that factors into every one of these secondary attributes. So we have strength, agility, dexterity, and fitness on the body side. What's particularly interesting about the fact that this character is a Soronay is that in our game, rather than having a fixed limit, such as with D&D, where 20 is kind of this arbitrary limit at which player characters are not able to go past that point without magic. And without the idea that traditionally with D&D you've had species modifiers where your species makes you stronger, and reflecting that these species are just physically powerful and things of that nature. In our game, what we end up doing is you actually have a maximum attribute rating for each of these 8 attributes based on your species. And so Temmanvyr, because they're big, they're automatically their maximum is 11 normally. When you purchase the Soronay Naosh at character creation or later on, what ends up happening is all of your attribute maximums are doubled. And so his strength is 16, but his maximum strength at this point actually is around 22. And just to give, not all of these have a defined quantification of what it means. But with strength, what we say is that, lifting capacity is kind of the thing that this gets pegged to. And with strength, what we've decided is that for every point of strength, you have the ability to lift 50 kilograms of weight, so around 100 pounds or so, without making any kind of a roll at all. You're just able to lift that much automatically. And then just to put all of these into a kind of a perspective, again, normal human, a human without a Naosh, so just totally normal, has a maximum attribute rating of 5 in all attributes. And so their average tends to sit somewhere in the 2 to 3 range. And so while this number here 2 looks very low, this does not mean that this character is stupid. This means that this character is of average intelligence compared to any human being that you might walk around and meet with. And then you have, again, perception, reaction, and psyche being the equivalent of fitness for the mind. And then we get into the secondary attributes. We have dodge, speed, combat, accuracy, and response. And these are used in various ways. And one of the ways that these are used is in defensive actions. And we'll get into that in just one second. The big thing here is that response is the equivalent of initiative in many other systems. And the way that response works in our game is you will roll, when called for, you'll roll 1d10. We use a 2d10 based system. 1 or 2 dice is typically what you'll roll. You'll do 1d10, and then what you will end up with is you will end up having, you will add this response attribute. And the highest rating then, or the highest result, is going to be the winner. In our system, the winner does not go first. The winner declares actions last. So on each combat phase, which is what we call our turns, each combat phase, all combatants move through and declare their actions, what they're going to do. And so the winner of the response roll gets the benefit of knowing what every other combatant is going to do before they make their decision of what their action is going to be. And so it gives them the ability to have a better picture of the battlefield before they decide what their action is going to be. And then all actions get resolved simultaneously, and it sounds like it's a big mess, and it is very different from the way that most combat is run in a lot of systems, but we find that it is very fast, and we find that it is really, really cool and allows for some combination of different effects when we go through combat. And one of those effects are these defensive actions. In Altered World, armor does not make you harder to hit. If anything, there are types of armor that will actually make you easier to be hit in combat, but armor reduces the incoming damage such that there's a point that it could potentially just completely negate the damage altogether. But if the attack does penetrate through your armor, you will then see some benefit in damage reduction. And we'll get to that when we get down here to armor. But so because you don't have what's considered an armor class, what this means is we have the ability that your character can take active defense. And this is, again, with our interest in creating tension in every decision, such that every decision is something of a trade-off for the player. If you use one of these defensive actions, unless you've built your character in a very specific way such that they have extra actions available to them each combat round, what you end up with is that you end up having to use a defensive action in place of attacking. And so with all of these, what you end up with is these are the combination of 2 of your secondary attributes, and these are listed here with your formula and how to do them. And then you end up with your rating, and when you choose to take this action, you will roll a single d10, and you are attempting to roll underneath these numbers. And so you can see with this character in particular, if you choose to take defensive actions, you are essentially going to automatically be able to, even on the worst roll, you're going to be able to reduce the effectiveness of your opponent's attacks somewhat. Then each of these has a different function. We try to get people to not get too locked in on what the names mean. Avoid and parry are quick actions that are taken to reduce the effectiveness of ranged for avoid and melee attacks against your character during the round, and they affect actually all melee attacks and all ranged attacks made against you. You basically take the success levels, the number of points that you have. Say you rolled a 5 and you were trying to avoid. Your rating is 13. You roll a 5. That means you would have 8 success levels. And so those 8 success levels can be distributed amongst all of the ranged attacks that are made against you in that combat phase. Block is where you take an object, and we've seen any kind of object, whether your character has a shield or whether in at least one playtesting session we had a player use a deceased opponent as a blocking tool, and the idea is that you interpose an object between yourself and the attack, and basically there's a way that you calculate whether or not it reduces the success of your opponent's attack, and if they miss you, they end up hitting the blocked object, and then that essentially acts as additional armor for you. And then evade is a more complex thing to do, but it's for strategists. What this allows you to do is to get out of the way of a melee attack in particular, and this is a single melee attack that you use this against, and then put yourself into a better position where you may be able to execute an immediate counterattack against your opponent. And so that's the way these defensive actions work. Next, we get down to resistance rolls. These basically, we've got fitness and psyche are the two broad areas of fitness rolls. These function, or resistance rolls, these function very similarly to saving throws in D&D. And this ARB, this is a concept that is woven throughout the game. The idea being that we use 2d10. We have a fixed success threshold of 20. So the idea is that on any given roll, you are attempting to achieve a value of 20 on your roll. In one of our other videos, and I'll post a link to it up here, or maybe over here, we talk about a recent change where we've gone through and we've added a guaranteed possibility of failure in all rolls. At least there's a 1% chance of failing in every roll. And so we've introduced the idea that in addition to rolling equal to or above your ARB on 2d10, you have to roll at least a 4 on the die. And so because we have this fixed threshold, what that allows us to do is, rather than going the path of making your roll and then doing math to determine whether or not you were successful, we do the math before the roll is thrown, and that produces this ARB, which you can think of as a target number. And then if your die roll is 8 or higher on a fitness resistance roll for this character, for example, you have succeeded. And then you figure out after that, how successful were you? And that is particularly useful with resistance rolls. So you can see this is essentially 20 minus your fitness rating. So this is 20 minus 12. So his fitness resistance roll is 8. So against effects that work against his body, he's going to be very, very robust. But then his mind is not quite as strong, and he would have to roll an 18 on the dice to be able to begin to resist a mental effect. And then the special fitness and special psyche, this is an issue where if your character has specific traits or conditions that maybe make it easier or harder for you to resist certain things, this is where you can pre-calculate that number and come up with an ARB for that. He doesn't have any of those specifically, but that's what you would put there. Then we come to health and spirit. This ARM in the middle stands for action roll modifier. So ARB stands for action roll base. ARM stands for action roll modifier. And so the idea was, originally the game had kind of a death spiral where these numbers here are calculated as the sum, or you add up all your physical attributes over here. And so if you add all this up, you get to 38. Well, what we've done is, before it was this issue that, when you had taken, in this particular case, this character, after he had taken 16 damage, he would get a penalty. And then after he took another 4 damage, he would get another penalty. And so you had this death spiral where, as you take more and more damage, you would then become less and less effective. And then once you got to 0 health, you go unconscious. And if you take an additional damage equal to your fitness rating, that is when your character actually dies. And so what we did, we felt like that death spiral was a little too severe. And so we reduced it now. So 75% of your total health rating is in this first block. And then when you have taken more than 75% damage and you're into this bottom section here, that's when you get a penalty that's applied. And this is an older system, which again, we have that video that we mentioned where we talked about how we went through and evaluated action roll base and modifiers and things of that nature in the dice rolls. This is an older system where we were exploring the idea of using what we call hitch in place of numerical modifiers, and we have since moved away from that. We lost a little bit of granularity, so this character sheet still has some updating to be done, but in function, this is where this modifier would be. I think what we have ended up with is that for action rolls, you end up with a +5 penalty to this. So this would be, for example, you would have on your action roll, you would have, your ARB is 4, for example. If you were down into either this bottom category of health or this bottom category of spirit, you would get a +5 to that, so your ARB would become 9. If you were in the bottom category, this stacks. So if you were in the bottom category of both health and spirit, you would actually have a +10 to your ARB until you would receive some healing. Next, we move to the right. We have our collection of stats that are useful for verbal combat. This is a social resolution mechanic that we developed that, to the greatest extent possible, mimics the way that physical combat works. And so we have resilience. Resilience is equal to your interaction score divided by 2. And this functions as essentially armor against social attacks. And so you reduce your damage and you reduce your chances of effect, which we'll get into in a minute, by this number here. And then resolve is essentially your verbal hit points. This is equal to your total spirit, but it is separate from. So the idea is that if you had taken drain and damage to your spirit, this would not affect your resistance to verbal combat other than any modifiers to the rolls, but it wouldn't affect your health in terms of verbal combat. And then conversely, if you take damage to your resolve, which renews automatically every day, if you take damage to your resolve, that doesn't affect your spirit over here. So these are equivalent, but not the same. And then what we have over here, this is also related to verbal combat, this beliefs. So there's a mechanic in here where you can define essentially hills to die on for your character. That when you are engaged in verbal combat, if you can articulate to your game master effectively that the nature of the verbal combat that's being imposed on you is related to one of your beliefs, you get to add your psyche rating to your resilience for that, for those attacks. So the idea being is that everyone has a certain level of resilience to being convinced of things, but everyone also has certain very tightly held or deeply held beliefs that are simply more difficult to convince people of. And so these reduced chances of effect, which is a more lasting impact to your character. So then we get to armor and weapons. So you can see that he has light armor. Temmanvyr have the power armor on their head. This is related to the idea that they have these big giant horns, and so their head that come out of their head, and so their head is thick. Narratively within the setting, Temmanvyr are beast tamers. They kind of headbutt dragons into submission, and so that's kind of part of where that comes from. He is wearing light armor, which has a rating of 5, which means that when you have an attack, the attack has to achieve a damage code here greater than 5, or at least 5, right? So you get to 0. If the damage is at least 5, it will penetrate the armor. And then once it has penetrated, the damage code is reduced by that. And then, so this, in this particular case, so he's wearing light armor. If he was struck with a katana, as you can see here, he would take, this would go down to 1 point of damage, which is damage against health here. And then you would reduce this chance of death, which there's a little bit of back and forth math on this, but this chance of death, this K1, is a possibility that your character may instantly die or instantly enter a state of dying from any individual attack. You're not necessarily instantly dead. There is although that is possible. And so these incoming chances of death are reduced by half the rating of your armor. So in this particular case, you would reduce any incoming attacks by the chance of death, or stun by 2. Then we get to weapons attacks. These are not all of the things that you could do, but these are things where you would be able to, these would be probably this character's primary functions that they would have kind of all the time. We just as a note to this, or a nod to this, the character is depicted with a large firearm, but does not have a firearm. And that is because in the wild side, technological equipment, ammunition, things like that are scarce. And so he doesn't necessarily carry them, but he does have training in them. Of note, this charge attack, there's some mechanics to it. You have to be sprinting, or you have to be running or sprinting, and you make an attack. But for him is significantly damaging. It does 14 damage, which is calculated off of the weight of the character that is making the attack. And then this K9 is a base, which is essentially the amount of damage is based off of your speed. And so in this particular iteration of this character, we have a couple little variations, but the intent is that you had to be sprinting in order to execute a charge attack, which meant that he had a base 9 chances to instantly kill his target, not before accounting for their armor. The way that this works is that when an attack goes through, penetrates through the armor, you reduce the base damage ratings by the armor, and then you add half of your success levels, which is the number of points above 20 that you achieve on your, or you can think of it as what you roll, the difference between what you roll and what your ARB was. So where that's useful is if your ARB happens to be a negative number. But the number of success levels, half those success levels are applied to both the damage rating and the chances of death. And so after accounting for the damage to see whether or not that actually kills the opponent, you would have the opponent would then make a high target roll. So with target rolls, this is a 1d10 die roll. You have high target rolls and low target rolls. The biggest difference is you're trying to roll high versus trying to roll low for success. With high target rolls, you have to exceed the target number. With low target rolls, it's meet or less than or equal to. And so with a high target roll, in this case, let's just say he just had a bare success. The target would take 14 points of damage after accounting for armor, and then have 9 chances of death. So they would have to roll a 10 on a 1-side or a 10-sided dice to avoid instantly dying. If they failed, the actual number on the dice is the number of combat phases before that character is actually dead. In practice, it's probably useful to only apply that specific principle to PCs and to major NPCs. If it's just a mob, then the game master, you just kind of wipe them off the table and they're done. But so you see he has a katana, a compound bow, his unarmed strike. This H here is to indicate that he would roll with a hitch. Again, this goes back to a slightly older version of the dice mechanics. And the reason for this is that this character does not have the unarmed combat talent. So he's not trained in fighting. So he's just fighting based off of his combat rating. Or the idea is that his unarmed strike he's using what we call a related talent. So it's based off of his archaic weapons ARB. In the current version of the dice mechanics, this number would actually just simply go to 12. So his unarmed strike would be 12. And the same with this charge here. It would go to 12, and then we have changed it so that it is possible to execute a charge while running, which is moving at your maximum speed rating, rather than sprinting, which gives you a little bit of extra movement. And so if the character was running, this damage code would go from 14k9 to 14k8. And what you would have is the ARB for this would be 12. If you were sprinting, because that's a stacking actions, you would end up with your ARB would go up to sprinting has a +5, so your ARB would go up to 17. So it would be much more damaging, but much more difficult to guarantee that you were hitting. So then we get to talents, traits, and powers. This is kind of the core of this. So all Temmanvyr have a species talent of animal handler. That's part of what they were designed to do in our game. The hominid species, or Belshazzar's children, we have a video about that. They were designed. They were not evolved creatures. They were created to serve a purpose. And so the Temmanvyr were created to keep large monstrous creatures in check. And so they have the animal handler talent at rating 3. This asterisk here means that this is linked to their level. So the idea is that as your level increases, you become, or what we're current on this sheet is referred to as level. As your level increases, you become better and better at this by just virtue of becoming, it's so ingrained into who you are. And so with this, for the ARB, this is calculated as your animal handler rating, which is 3. It's 20 minus your talent rating. Because it's linked, you would then subtract your character's level. So that would get you down to that'd be -7, so it would be at 13. And then you have animal handler as a social talent, so it's based off your interaction. So you would get down to an ARB of 11. So if this character were to attempt to use this talent in a way that was meaningful enough that the game master decided you needed to roll, in order to be successful, you'd have to roll an 11 on 2 10-sided dice. And allows you to very quickly throw the dice and then say, I was successful or I was not. So then we can go back. This particular character, his background is that he is a former soldier from and was a forward observer. And so he has this mercenary pro pack. In our game, when you purchase a talent as an individual talent, you have to purchase the talent itself, and then you purchase the rating separately. Pro packs allow you to define a profession that your character has worked in, and each pro pack has 6 talents that are associated with it. And when you purchase a pro pack, it costs 1 character creation point, or essentially 10 talent points. And you get 5 of those 6 talents in that pro pack at a descending rating of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so you get to choose which aspects of a profession maybe your character just is not talented in at all. And you can also choose, distribute your talents of what your character is best at within that pro pack. Pro packs represent about a 50% cost reduction over just purchasing all those talents individually. the trade-off that you have for saving points is that when you purchase a talent with or when you purchase a pro pack, the talents that you have within it, you are not able at character creation to do what we call sub-skill and mastery, which is the idea is that with, say, for example, gunnery, if this character, we wanted to take a sub-skill in gunnery, we could say maybe his gunnery talent, he was particularly well trained with rifles. And so the gunnery talent the gunnery talent rating would decrease from, say, 2 to 1, but the rifles rating would increase from 2 to 3. And so that would allow you to kind of tailor, and then you can do a further step beyond that of mastery, which is specifically further narrowing the field. And a lot of times when you do a sub-skill, there are also certain non-mathematical benefits that your character gets out of it as well. So that's a way in which you can really customize your character, but you're not able to do that to talents that are purchased with a pro pack or that you get through a pro pack at character creation. You can, in play, spend experience points to take on sub skills and mastery. In those particular cases, it does work a little bit different in that the base talent rating doesn't decrease. You simply train more on some narrow aspect of your talent. Let's see. So he had the Mercenary Pro Pack, which has these here. Discourse is our general purpose social talent. And then Ballistics relates to indirect fire weapons, things like grenade launchers, howitzers, things of that nature. And then he also has the Wildsider Pro Pack. So Bushcraft is generally survival. Medicine is fairly self-explanatory. Archaic weapons and projectile weapons are, melee type swords and knives and things of that nature. And then projectile weapons are generally bows. Area awareness is just it's a talent, frankly, that was more important in my generation often than it seems to be now with the advent of smartphones, but just the idea of knowing where things are within a given area, things of that nature. All right, so then we go to traits. The Temmanvyr, for a number of different reasons from a mechanics perspective, they have the hindered trait. So their speed rating is lower than it would be mathematically. So if you took the 4 primary attributes that combine up and are averaged out to give your speed, this character's speed would actually be a 10. But he has this trait hindered by virtue of being a Temmanvyr, and so his speed rating is dropped down to 2. This character has a lot of drawbacks, and part of that is to buy off some points to give these powers that he's got over here. Weirdness Magnet is just it's a way for a game master to mess with you, frankly. He's also hindered on, this says initiative, this is should say response. Mistrust is just that authority figures do not, they don't like his face. And so anytime he interacts with them, there's a possibility that they may have an unpleasant interaction. Unlucky is fairly self-explanatory. Illogical applies a penalty to rolls, perception rolls to figure out problems. Perception is used both to notice things and to puzzle through them. There is also a talent called Puzzler, which generally is going to be better if you have it than simply relying on your perception, but it is, without it, you can still try to figure things out that way. Impaired, so this means that his sense of taste just doesn't work very well. This is kind of a niche thing, and it's almost kind of a gimme of a couple of extra points. And then disfigured is it's a trait or drawback that affects social combat or verbal combat. So he is, because of his, I think in this particular case, this character is kind of stinky, is what we decided. And so because of that, he is not as able to be effective in verbal combat because people are just put off by his appearance or odor. And then we get to advantages. He only has the one. Skilled is essentially the inverse of speed. So he is skilled in the accuracy derived attribute or secondary attribute. So mathematically, this attribute would actually come out to a 6, and then skilled adds this rating of 2 to that attribute. Then we get over to powers. Soronay, again, their powers are kind of like being a mutant, and so their powers are innate to who they are. So some of this, he has some powers, but just by virtue of being a species. A Temmanvyr. Temmanvyr have, it's the fangs power, but these are really more like a tusk. I think originally we drew them as almost like saber teeth, and we realized that mechanically that doesn't work on a bipedal creature. Your jaw is not able to, if you have large tusks from the upper mandible or the upper teeth, like a saber tooth, what you end up with is you're not able to open your mouth wide enough because your jaw is hindered in movement by your chest. And so that we decided to shift this around so that it's more like an elephant's tusks. And so, but mechanically, this is the fangs power, and so this is a thing that you can do to create an attack with your fangs. He also has horns, so he can do that there, and then armor on the head. And again, this is virtue of these horns across the forehead there. And then he has the powers that the character has chosen. So we have heightened sense, sight. That's pretty straight self-explanatory. Low light vision and thermal vision. Low light vision, the rating here, what this means is it's the number of meters away that you can see normally when the amount of light from a candle is within the rating number of meters from you. So as long as he has as much light as would be produced by a candle within 4 meters of him, he can see normally within that range. Thermal vision, the rating relates to the temperature gradient that you're able to see. I think we do it with 20 degree Celsius, and then you divide that by the rating. So he can see in 5 degrees Celsius increments, which is a decent level of resolution, but not super precise. And so that's what he has. These animal change, this is essentially, he has the ability to turn into a flying squirrel. You have to choose specifically the animal that you can transform into. This is, I guess, supposedly conceptually similar to like a druid wild shape in Dungeons and Dragons. The difference that we have here is that we explicitly say that unless you pay extra for the points or for the power, your equipment is not included in that. So essentially he becomes a flying squirrel in the middle of a pile of gear. Shadow Meld, this is an interesting power. It allows you, as long as there is a continuous path of shadow, you can essentially meld into it and move along it. It doesn't necessarily grant you any direct invisibility type of power, but it does allow you to kind of move through areas where you maybe could not otherwise move. So for example, if you shadow meld into a shadow that and that shadow crosses over the threshold of a window where there is an actual physical gap, you could move through that gap and then unmeld on the other side. It is possible that you can still be seen because you're a moving shadow. You're not behaving quite normally. Suggestion. So this essentially gives a mental suggestion to another target. The reason that this has an asterisk here is because with the way that powers work for Soronay, because they are innate in their nature, has to do with these letter codes over here. Now we have 4 different types of powers. We have automatic powers, inherent powers, duration powers, and scripted powers. Scripted powers in particular are very much like a spell. You cast it when you are ready for it to be used. Automatic, inherent, and duration powers, without going into a whole lot of the detail of them, automatic powers are always on for Soronay while they're active. Inherent powers, you can think of like an automatic power that has an off switch. You can choose to turn that power off and then turn it back on. And then duration powers, you turn them on and then you can use them repeatedly through this. Duration powers tend to be things like attack powers. What you end up with is for Soronay, automatic, inherent, and duration powers do not require a roll to activate your power. Scripted powers do. And so you can see that the only power that he would ever have to roll to actually activate his power is suggestion. And that's good because his rating isn't great. And with Soronay, the action roll base for a power action roll is 20 minus the power rating. And so with a rating of 2, he's got to roll an 18 to get this to work at all. And so this is something where perhaps this is definitely not something you would necessarily want to use in combat because it's not reliable. But in situations where combat timekeeping is not necessarily being used, or if your character is not, if your target isn't aware of your presence, this is something that you could essentially just narratively spam it until you get it to work. And then you would figure out how long did that process take. And you would make the rolls because of our dice mechanic where if you roll doubles on 2d10, you gain experience and the dice explode. But that would be the only reason to roll specifically for that, is so that the player has the opportunity to earn experience there. Weather sense is just what it sounds like. Empathy is the ability to essentially read the surface level emotion of your target. And then remote sight is kind of an interesting power in that it creates essentially like an invisible floating eyeball. And you can move it around based on your rating out to a distance based on your rating. And when this power is active, you are not able to see out of your actual physical eyes. And so what that means is you can move your visual experience through, again, much like with Shadow Meld, if there's a small gap, you can move through it. As long as light can pass through, you would be able to move your remote sight through there. So this is useful from a reconnaissance perspective, but does create a situation where if you're using it and you don't have backup, it can be problematic because you won't be able to see what's happening around you. Lastly, on this front page, we get to equipment. Basically, he's got a CyberMac-based computer. Cybernetics in our game are a little more complex. It's not just like you just slap a robotic arm onto your character. You have to have a base computer that runs all of the programs, and it's got a certain memory capacity for the programs that will be run, and each cybernetic system has an amount of this memory capacity that it uses. And so there's various base computers, and then there's other things that go into it as well. But but then moving on with his equipment, you have climbing gear, and this would give him a bonus on athletics rolls to climb. You notice he does not actually have the athletics talent. And so this will essentially mostly mitigate the penalty for being untrained in athletics. But climbing is largely based off of, if I remember correctly, it's based off of agility. So he's not too bad at it, but it does provide a little bit of help. And then he's got a medical toolkit, which again provides a benefit, a bonus to the medicine talent when you're using it. And then he's got these metal shaft broadhead arrows. We have within our equipment, with arrows for bows, there's a number of variables that you can tailor. Metal shaft arrows have a higher fitness, so they're less likely to break. Broadhead arrows do more damage. So you can kind of customize the arrow to your effect if you want to be, Hawkeye or whatever. Moving on to the back of the sheet, we have a little bit of play notes, which this is just really, this is both a little bit of information about who the character is, but it also towards the bottom here, you've got a little bit of mechanical information. This actually, I think we may need to revise because I'm not sure that this is actually correct anymore. Um, all the things. And then we have just a very basic listing of all of the talents, powers, and traits that the character has. And this allows you to kind of just quickly get an idea of how you can use it. So if you're, say for example, you're at a convention and you're picking up the Beer and Pretzels kit and you're just going to play, this will actually help you kind of understand what the character does. On most of the character sheets and the ones that we get to in the future, we've tried to include, to the best extent we could, we've tried to include a little bit more mechanical information about how the power or the trait works. In this particular case, this character, he has so many talents, traits, and powers. Plus, you have this block of space right here for this physical stat block for the animal change, the flying squirrel, that you end up with not having enough space to actually include a lot of that mechanics. But so you would have to refer, if you wanted to understand a little better how the things worked in the moment, you might have to refer to the book. And so that's it. That's Souleymane. He is a character that we find people who want to play this character really want to play this character. They really enjoy it. I will tell you one thing that's kind of interesting. We've seen when we built this character, for example, we gave this animal change power from a reconnaissance perspective. Never once did we think that, this will be used in combat, primarily because with powers like this, animal change, if you think about, it's an inherent power, so it's always on, but it has an off switch. So anytime you're not walking around as a flying squirrel, you consider that off. So in order to turn into a flying squirrel, you have to pay the phase cost, which is the number of combat phases that it takes before your power manifests. And so for Soronay, their powers that have to manifest over time are slow. And this is part of how we balance them out because they kind of get a lot. And so we never once thought, well, who'd want to turn into a flying squirrel in the middle of a gunfight? And lo and behold, every single time we've had somebody play this character, they immediately gravitate to the idea that they want to turn into a squirrel and pull off some kind of a super cinematic move where they turn into a squirrel and then turn that power off instantly in midair while they're leaping and be this giant naked troll flopping onto people in the middle of a fight. We try to steer people away from that because the way that our combat mechanics ends up working, it can be a little unsatisfying when you're new to the game. Anyway, that's Souleymane Abdoul Aziz, the Wildsider Temmanvyr Soronay. Thanks very much for watching. We'll put we've got some video cards that'll come up here, and you can check out some of our other stuff. Give us a like, give us a subscribe to us if you think this is interesting. Hit the notification bell so that you can see when our videos go live. We tend to post every Wednesday at least, and then we'll often do a little bonus video throughout the week. Anyway, thanks very much, and alter your world.